almost creating a zone within a zone to protect themselves, the military. The Americans, so if any attack by the Iraqi resistance on these camps, it will fall on Iraqis themselves, who are there around, circling this, and women, some of them. And this is, I mean, you can see the military are doing a lot of courses now. They are teaching them how to make good proposal, how to identify things, to get contracts with the military. Finally, in conclusion, and I think you already had a big dose of history, maybe, and I think, I still think, I mean, partly because of my history, perhaps, partly because of what my experience in the last 40 years within the Iraqi culture scene, women movement, as well as some of the knowledge, maybe a bit of knowledge politically. I think the advancements and establishment of women's rights cannot be really separated from human rights in general. It has to be part of it. And women has to be treated like citizens with a special attention to gender-based equality. And equality only achieved, in case of Iraq, unless we really get rid of the occupiers, of the colonial powers, who are humiliating the people, who are in control of our resources, and oil, we didn't have much time to talk about it as well. And unless we do all that, there will be no women rights whatsoever, separated, and there will be no peace in the future as well, because peace, the only peace we are looking at, it has to be between equal people, equal nations, and it has to be based on justice, not injustice. Thank you very much.
I know that during the time of anti-colonial movement, Iraq for a few years entertained the anti-colonial movement to have Nazi yeah, no, it's okay. Because you are recording. Because of that. Yeah. There was a few years that they entertained pro-Nazi sentiments, even in the anti-colonial movement in Iraq. How did that function there? Anti-colonialism and that aspiration there. And then, when we heard that the Communist Party was supporting Qasim's revolution, which I remember very well because most of the artists, the best artists of the Iraqi then, they were all my colleagues in Rome, extraordinary artists, and they were the creme of the Academy of Fine Arts there. I am not surprised at the support of the Communist Party there, but I have heard that the Communist Party now, there in Iraq, are collaborating with the occupiers. How can we explain these two strange phenomena? First, that period of anti-colonialism and the pro-Nazi sentiments in that movement, and now, in this movement, now that we heard about the hell that hell living, how is it that officially they are collaborating, supposedly, the Communist Party in Iraq? Could you just say something if you don't mind?
Well, I wish I know exactly what's happening, but I think after the fall of the Soviet Union, Iraqi communists felt like they've been orphaned. They became suddenly void of that major support, which all their lives were really glorifying, working for, following ideas. I mean, I mentioned that there is the policy of the Ba'ath, for example, with the Communist Party regarding women was mirror to each other. Maybe I forgot to mention, except for one thing. I mean, whenever I read all the speeches and talks and read articles, as a role model for the communists is the Soviet woman. Well, when you look at the speeches and talks and articles for the Ba'ath party, you see they go back to the Islamic history and Arab history. And they bring the role models from that. So they are more attached to inside Iraq, nationalistically, rather than being into this openness to the world, ignoring the Iraqi society and how deep-rooted is in history at that time. So when the walking stick, which they were leaning on all their lives, fell, I think they lost their balance. And of course I'm talking now, and I know many of the people, I mean some of ex-comrades and some of them we know of, they are in supporting the colonial, the invasion and the occupation and the neo-colonialism in Iran. And there is a change also, became suddenly they are the neoliberal. And they are very clever in justifying this occupation because they say, we talk, we ask them, what's going on? They say, well, we are pragmatic. This is, we are there, the US is the biggest military power in the world. We cannot fight it, but we have to accept it as it is and we work with it. This is their own words. So it is the collapse of the Communist Party, despite the fact it has very long history and has very big achievements in our history.
And what about the other one?
Supporting it.
The pro-Nazi.
They weren't pro-Nazi themselves, not the communists.
No.
But in general, I mean, the Iraqis were divided then. Because they were really between two forces. Either they have to work with the British, and they are trying to occupy, or to support the Germany, which was with Turkey, the Ottoman Empire at the time. We're talking now about the Second World War. That they were promised, I mean, we didn't have this long history of colonial, with the German. So it was okay for some powers in Iraq. And it was 1941, I think, when the Intifada took place and the British came and reoccupied Iraq after that. Because the Iraqi government then did not allow the army to go through Iraq, the British army to fight them, I think. That's my knowledge.
No, please. Yes.
I think there is a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Is my friend. Yeah. Could be.
But there is I think there is a link in here, and this is almost related to this leaflet which says about the indigenization of the political process. One of the issues of communism in the Third World is that most of it has been aligned with the Soviet bloc. So they were part of the Cold War. But there was a Third World communist movement as well. There are two different strands. In Iraq as well, the rank and file of the Communist Party was mostly Third World communism. This is Vietnam, China, Guevara, Cuba type communist. But the leadership were the type of leadership which relied totally on the Soviet Union. And they began to acquire the pragmatic streak, which ended up being pragmatic with their American occupation. So the link of the pro-Soviet communists with their own people is actually very tenuous. The link of the Third World communists with the people and their respect for the heritage, the respect for the ordinary people and their own history is stronger. And I think that's the issue. And what happened in 1941 was that the Iraqis were fighting the British. there was an attempted coup d'etat by 4 officers who was supported by the then Prime Minister. At the time, the international scene was very fluid. And they're kind of siding, they wanted support from anywhere. And they were supported by groups in Turkey and in Germany, I think, at the time. But all of this was labeled this as fascist or Nazis. But it wasn't, because we know that, for example, the Indian nationalists at the time has pro-German sympathies because they were anti-British. A lot of nationalist movement everywhere in the Third World were dubbed as pro-Nazi because they were anti-British. Britain was the dominant empire at the time. Any anti-British was the... I think that's the